Hello and welcome to this video demonstrating why some species are not a good candidate for bonsai. Just about all species of bush, shrub, vine, tree and more can be used as stock for bonsai. That is, just about all. There are some exceptions and these can be very important. An example of this is known as oleander, which, while not on the level of the gimpy gimpy tree, it is enough of a concern that you can learn from it. Oleander is a very pretty shrub verging on tree. It is between 2 and 6 meters tall. Bright flowers and long vibrant leaves. All of these are desirable attributes in a bonsai. The only downside to oleander is that it is a very toxic plant. While not as deadly as some species, it is enough to cause problems. In this case, the attractive look and relative resilience of oleander means it can be a problem if handled regularly. Unlike other species where contact with the poisonous plant causes a reaction, oleander is slightly different. It has a very unpleasant taste. That means unless you make a habit of tasting your bonsai, the most apparent warning sign is not available. You won't even get the initial rash or inflammation that's an early sign or indicator that this is a problematic species. The challenge with this is that consuming the plant directly is not entirely necessary. You can, when handling the plant during wiring and pruning, get poisoned through your skin. There are two molecules in oleander that are a problem, oleandrin and oleandrogenin. These are otherwise known as cardiac glycosides, and the problem is they affect the heart, and they affect the heart with a very small dose. These two molecules can be absorbed through the skin, and although this route is a much lower rate of absorption compared to oral administration routes, it is enough to cause problems, and especially if you are either working on very fine branch structures where you're constantly interacting with the leaves and not necessarily crushing them, but getting in contact enough to be intoxicated, pruning it, or working with a much larger specimen that takes a very long time and involves lots of handling. Oleander can cause contact issues, and so this is a best case scenario. It can cause dermatitis, and that's basically inflammation and rash on your skin. This is your first sign that you have a problem, because it's telling you that you have touched something that is toxic and dangerous. The worrying thing is that you don't need a very high concentration of oleandrin and its related glycoside to kill you. In fact, it's 20 nanograms a milliliter. These are tiny amounts. Poison's information on this is relatively limited, but between 14 and 20 leaves from a plant can be enough to cause issues. Admittedly, with children it can be as little as 1 leaf. So there's a very wide range, and at least in theory, the better developed and maintained the oleander tree is, the more likely it is to have a high concentration of these molecules. The way they work is surprisingly straightforward, but unpleasant. It interferes with part of the cardiac cells, and specifically talking about the neurons within the heart, the ones responsible for telling the heart to contract. And within these neurons, there is a specific structure called the sodium-potassium ATP ACE, also known as the sodium-potassium pump. This is what shuffles potassium and sodium between the inside and outside of neurons, allowing for the action potential to be passed on, or, in this case, recovered. Without that, the heart may be able to contract, but it won't be able to contract again after that. Because it is a lipophilic compound, that is, it's something that can be dissolved in fat, not only can it be easily absorbed not only through the skin, but more so through the gastrointestinal tract, getting rid of it is very slow. In fact, it takes about 20 minutes after consuming it orally to reach maximum concentration. Compare this to something like, say, caffeine or paracetamol, they're about 30 minutes, so it's a very, very easily absorbed drug. It also has a half-life of about 2 hours. The majority of what you're going to be getting out of your body or removing as waste is going to be a relatively tiny amount will be removed via the kidneys. The challenge with this is that it does at least somewhat accumulate in the heart, and this is why the heart is particularly vulnerable, but any neuron in the human body is going to be vulnerable because they all rely on that same ATPase. In order to be able to deal with it as a result, you really need to avoid exposure. There is some evidence indicating things like activated charcoal will work, but overall, it is a particularly nasty and very difficult to remove toxin. This is just one example of how a small, pretty flower can actually be deadly. The expression, "the prettier a rose the sharper its thorn," seems applicable. Even without faux witty quotes, it is a good lesson that sometimes you do need to know what species you are handling with bonsai, as although this is a very pretty looking species, it's also one that could kill you if you aren't careful. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.